Thank you for listening and supporting the Daily Memphian. Sign up for one of our many free newsletters and breaking news alerts at dailymemphian.com/email to receive the latest local news stories impacting our community. Our weekly newsletters cover everything from sports to arts and culture, business, food, and more, along with daily updates of all the news we publish each day. Sign up or manage your email preferences at dailymemphian.com/email.
I'm Bill Dries with the Daily Memphian. This is one in a series of podcast interviews for our stories marking 50 years since the start of Plan Z busing for the racial integration of what was then Memphis City Schools. And we're talking with Steve Steffens. And so let me set the scene here. Steve, you and your family moved to Memphis from out of town in 1972, that summer, into that fall. You are an 8th grader when you hit town, and your school, your neighborhood school, is Oakshire Elementary School in Whitehaven. You do a semester, and then starting in January 1973, you are bused to Whitehaven Elementary School, the middle of the school year, as part of the predecessor to Plan Z called Plan A. So,
yes.
So let's start there. You're new to the city and as a result in a new school. How much did you know about the busing discussion here, all of the speculation, all of the rumors, all of the discussion about what would happen as a result of it?
Well, my family and I were avid newspaper readers, and we took the press center at that time, and we watched local news and we kept up with it. We lived in an apartment complex along Hudgens, which at the time ran from Holmes down to State Line Road. And we were just on the east side of Interstate 55. We kept up with what was going on. And I'd gotten to know some kids my age at Oakshire, and the newest thing I could find that I hadn't experienced was that they had what they called portable classrooms at the time in little trailers next to the building. It was a kid from rural Illinois and Arkansas. This was somewhat new, and I'd gotten to know everybody, and then we found out that we were going to Whitehaven Elementary. And I knew about Whitehaven High by that time, and I was like, okay. And I went over there, and we had some new and different teachers, and it wasn't really that much different from Oakshire.
Mm-hmm.
And then I can't remember at what point in the year we found out where our assignments for 9th grade would be. And it turns out that if you lived east of Mill Branch, you were going to go to Oakshire Junior High School at Shelby Drive and Horn Lake Road.
All right. And we should point out you're now in Plan Z, and there are 2 Jeters. We're talking about Jeter with G. With a G, it's a junior high school because it's the 1970s and middle schools are not around yet, at least here.
That's
okay.
Correct. And if I remember correctly, Jeter had just been dropped down from being a full-fledged high school because of Plan Z, if I remember correctly. And that had kind of shaken up the neighborhood. I think their kids had been split up between Westwood and Fairleigh. And it was kind of startling. I knew that at Whitehaven Elementary, there, all around me, the people that I knew that lived east of Mill Branch, a good portion of them were saying, well, we're going to Bishop Burn next year. We're not going to Jeter.
Right. And Bishop Burn was a private school up until about 2013, a Catholic school that was a high school there in Whitehaven.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and my parents were like, no, you're going to Jeter. It won't hurt you. You might learn something new. I mean, my parents, bluntly put, were a way bit more progressive than most people I knew at that time. It may explain some of my views, but I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes. And so that fall, I hated having to get up at 5:30 in the morning to be on the bus at 6:30, but I did it. And our area was outside of the apartment complex, was mostly suburban at that time, as most of Whitehaven was in 1973. And I got there and it was different. It was the first time in my life I'd ever been the minority in any place. Like I said, I'd grown up in rural Illinois and rural Arkansas prior to moving here. But it just seemed different and interesting. My first homeroom teacher was somebody I really admired, Duncan Teague. He was also my science teacher. He later went on to run the city schools planetarium at Craigmont High School. In fact, I think that happened in the middle of the 73-74 season. He left at the end of the semester and he was replaced by Ed Sharp, who was now a different type of science teacher because he had been a history and social studies teacher at Whitehaven for many years. So it was different, to say the least. But over the course of this time, a lot of the people that I got to know who lived in the Fairleigh area, I made friends with some of them, to the end of their lives. And I made friends with people from the area, some of whom I know to this day and are friends with. It was different in many ways. It was the very best thing that ever happened to me because it opened my eyes to what life was like in a majority Black area. I only got in one fight the whole time. It was like we threw a couple of punches at each other and that was it. I don't think anybody even got suspended. It just, and then that was it. In fact, I don't remember seeing the other guy again. But it was, ninth grade stuff. But I noticed that with the exception of Dr. Teague's classroom, it seemed like Jeter didn't have as much money as, say, Oakshire or Whitehaven, and they just weren't given the resources. But that didn't prevent me from having wonderful teachers and having people who cared about my education. And as I mentioned in my email, Bill, if I hadn't been forced to do that, I probably wouldn't have done it on my own, but it was because of what it woke me up to, so to speak. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. It really got me to understand new people and knew everything. Mm-hmm. It was an education in and of itself.
Right. So when you're riding the bus to Jeter, how many other white kids are on the bus with you?
About 20, 25.
About 20. Okay.
Yeah. And I can even tell you the route was, we went down Holmes for all the way to, I believe it was Neely, and we drove around through the Fairleigh area, and then we wound our way back to Horn Lake Road and to Jeter. Mm-hmm. And, it was, 20, 25 kids on the bus. It was about what I had expected.
Right. And Whitehaven, we should point out, racially, Whitehaven was probably a different place demographically than the Whitehaven of today.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, and basically, it was almost like the dividing line, I want to say, was Neely Road. Uh, and, you know, it was mostly white east to, it was somewhat white and black between Neely Road and Elvis Presley. And of course, east of Elvis Presley, it was all white. It was very, very suburban. Of course, an irony of this is I did not know her at the time, but my wife, who was born here, she had two older sisters that lived in the area around Sherwood Junior High School, near where Mike Cornell grew up, and they were going to go instead of Messick to Melrose. So, in order to avoid that, her father took a job in Milan, Tennessee, and that's where her sisters graduated from high school, and essentially she did too. But she came back to Memphis in '85. As for Whitehaven, yeah, it was very, very white. That's the irony of the time. Mm-hmm. And it was mixed in terms of income. I mean, it was middle class to upper middle class with some working class. Of course, me growing up in an apartment, yeah, that was working class.
Mm-hmm. And which today is really the story of Whitehaven High School too. Children at what is now a predominantly black high school who come from different income groups, different types of backgrounds at Whitehaven High School. What was Whitehaven High the school that you attended by where you lived, or was it by plan?
No, it was where I lived. Okay. I was in their own. And, I did notice that my sophomore year, 74, 75, I'd say it was about 55% white. And then by the time I graduated in May of 77, it was about 53% black. And it just slowly changed over that time. The people who had been there all those years, and when I was there were people who had gone to Whitehaven Elementary and Whitehaven High for all 12 years. And I think the last one to do that was the last person to do that was like 1977 in my class, from what I remember. And it was, but the great thing about Whitehaven that I'm proud to say that I went there is the academic achievement has not ever changed. And in fact, it may have even gotten a little better. And every year when they talk about how many merit scholarships and how much in scholarship money that their students have been awarded, I'm just very proud.
Mm-hmm. And do you think that the schools change demographically? Do you think that that's because of white flight from busing, or was it just in some cases families moved that had no connection to busing? But where on the scale?
I think it's about 70% white flight, because you could see what was starting to happen. I mean, it was like what was going on in Fraser. It was like everyone was slowly moving east. Whitehaven folks moved to Hickory Hill, and then as that demographic changed, then they started moving into Germantown and Collierville or into DeSoto County. A lot of the white flight went into DeSoto County, especially after Dr. Harrington was elected, sadly. But
mm-hmm. So here we are 50 years later, half a century. Hard to believe for those of us who were there. What are your judgments when you look back at Plan Z's overall effect on the city? Did it change Memphis?
Not enough, because there was so much incredible resistance I mean, something that, we knew that there were private schools. There were the diocesan Catholic schools. There was, CBHS and St. Agnes and St. Dominic's and IC at the time for women. And MUS, Harding, a lot of them had always been there. And we knew that those weren't white schools. But, there were so many of them. Elliston, SBEC, which ironically, SBEC, which is now, I believe, North Point, it started where John P. Freeman Elementary is in Whitehaven. It was at, I think, Neely, just south of Holmes. And that fascinated me. It just, a lot of those schools, with the exception of North Point, a lot of those schools have gone away. I mean, and I think Briarcrest and ECS also came up in that, but I think most of the really, I don't know, a lot of those schools just went away over the course of time because they just simply did not have the academics. So, right. I mean, we didn't evolve well in all of that. I mean, the idea was right and just. And even to this day, I do have resentment about people who went to white flight academies. If they went to CBHS or something that had been well established, well, that is what it is. And I did, and if somebody went to a diocesan Catholic school, yeah, I understand that completely because they've always had a system to take in people who were not economically advantaged. So, but so many of them have disappeared because they deserved to. But the effect that they had on white people abandoning the public school system is something that affects Memphis in particular, but, in other large cities around the South to this day.
Mm-hmm. And in the court ruling that brought about Plan Z, and in the court case itself, there was all sorts of discussion about whether real estate in the city and who lives where was affected by where the schools were, or whether the schools were following what the real estate practices were. So do you think that Plan Z had an effect on where people live and why they live there?
Yeah. I mean, all of those, the county exploded because of white flight and because of decisions made by the county commission on building schools. And there were some people whose names I won't mention that made fortunes out of white flight because they were constantly building new subdivisions. And the Shelby County Commission basically just said, what can we do to help you? We've got to get these people out of Memphis. And I don't know where they are now, but anyway.
All right. So 50 years on, we now have Memphis Shelby County Schools. The school system is the city of Memphis and the unincorporated county. What do you think about when you think back on those days, those historic days when white students in great numbers were planned to be going to black schools, and black students in great numbers were going to what had previously been predominantly white schools? What was it an exciting time as a child for you?
It was interesting because it meant I had to learn things and meet new people and understand what they were going through. I mean, I'm not going to lie. I might have had just a little bit of trepidation. I was just a white kid from the sticks who just moved to Memphis. But my parents were like, you'll be fine with this. And they were right. They were absolutely right. Like I said, I met people that I've known 50 years and are friends with. It made a difference. It really, really made a difference for me as a human being. You know, you open yourself up to new possibilities and new ideas. You got to burst that bubble if you're going to really educate yourself. And this did. You know, like I said, if I hadn't been forced to do it, I might not have, but I'm grateful that I was.
Mm-hmm. Were your parents kind of a united front in terms of this, or did you guys talk about it or
Well,
did they
we
just?
talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it was just simply based on money. It's like, well, you know, now, truth be told, my father had been raised Catholic, and he had walked out of a Catholic elementary school in Dixon, Illinois when he was 9, went home to his mother and said, I'm never going back. And he didn't. And he went into public schools. And from that time on, he was a huge believer in public schools, as was my mother. I mean, they were both public school kids in Illinois. And, you know, I had been a public school kid my whole life. The first time I ever went to a private institution of learning was when I was a freshman at CBC, which tells you how old I am.
Christian Brothers College instead of Christian Brothers
University. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. Well, we have been talking with Steve Steffens here about Plan Z 50 years later. I'm Bill Dries, and this is the Daily Memphian.
In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.